Looking back, it's almost inconceivable to our way of thinking that there is almost no general social consideration of the morality of slavery until we get to the early 1770s. Now, there are exceptions. There's a Quaker and even a Mennonite, Anabaptist protest against slavery that goes right back to the 1690s. And then there's some important works by Quakers. John Wohman and Anthony Benizet wrote the most important ones in the 1750s and 60s. But the Quakers are always kind of on the margin. 1772, the decision in a British court of law, the Mansfield decision, that a slave, Somerset, brought from the Caribbean could not be enslaved on English soil because there was no parliamentary legislation, triggered an outburst of anti-slavery agitation. Christopher Brown, a really good historian of the anti-slavery movement, has said the combination of worries about Parliament enslaving America and residual moral concern led to an outburst of anti-slavery agitation. Benjamin Rush, the Philadelphia physician who would sign the Declaration of Independence, wrote a pamphlet strongly arguing against slavery, 1772 or 1773, in response to a pamphlet from the West Indies that had justified slavery on biblical grounds. The Israelites could enslave the non-Israelites. Jesus never spoke against slavery. The Apostle Paul told slaves to obey their masters. Rush said, no, you've got those passages all wrong. And he combined some Bible exposition with strong libertarian notions about the general value of freedom to argue sharply against slavery. And then there were republished in the American colonies pamphlets by Granville Sharp, who was one of the first Anglican opponents of slavery, making the same argument. During the war itself, some of the students of Jonathan Edwards used his understanding of benevolence, the way in which a truly reformed person, a truly converted person would live a life of disinterested benevolence. This thinking led particularly his closest student, Samuel Hopkins, to write a dialogue concerning slavery in 1776, address it to the Continental Congress. He used some biblical reasoning, some philosophical reasoning, some political reasoning to say it's just a disaster if we say we're defending our freedom against enslavement from Parliament to keep in actual bondage a black population. There's a few other people. Jacob Green, a Presbyterian in the Middle Colonies, Freeborn Garretson, who would become an important Methodist leader, Levi Hart, a Connecticut minister. There are a number of other voices that make a real strong anti-slavery pitch during the Revolution, and there is some traction for their views. When the Methodists organized in 1784, when the Presbyterians reorganized in 1787, they have statements saying slavery is just against the law of God and it should be abolished. Quite a few Baptist regional organizations, including some in the upper South and even the lower South, say the same thing. So we have a situation where Black Christians feel a strong sense of liberation in the 1770s and 80s, but in opposition to the American Revolution. So we have really important leaders of Black churches like David George, who's born a slave in the South, Georgia and South Carolina, who is converted, begins to preach, learns to read so that he can preach better. But during the Revolution, he will be liberated by the British and taken to Nova Scotia with the Loyalists, and he will look back on the new United States as Egypt, from which he was liberated. George is a wonderful story of George because he will eventually be taken to Sierra Leone, where he founds Black Baptist churches in Sierra Leone, as he did in Nova Scotia and in the American South.